Borderline Disorder, Relationships, Drama, and Warnings by John Christian, narrated by Sarah Owens. Chapter 1. From Cute Little Girl to Borderline Personality Patient. One of the prominent commonalities usually found in folks identified with BPD, or borderline personality disorder, is their fear of abandonment. Could it be possible that women and men with BPD fear desertion because they do things that inspire people in their lives to want to get rid of them? Their upset behavior, for instance, is a losing formula for how to make a relationship last. I remain in no chance meaning to blame the victim. Many people with borderline disorders are victims of their psychological hyperreactivity, typically stemming from earlier in life injuries and a resultant hyperreactive amygdala. Meanwhile, the fears of an individual who fears desertion are totally appropriate because that individual's provocative habits invite rejection. I am also not saying that the conduct of those with borderline disorders is on purpose. I'm definitely claiming, though, that high-intensity negative feelings, and particularly high-intensity expressions of anger, can drive others away. Why would somebody want to desert an individual with BPD? Enabling a person who acts in painful ways to remain involved in your life might sign you up for too much psychological turbulence. The kind of BPD psychological overreactions I am referring to are the kind that bite off your head with anger. Bear in mind that all people with BPD don't rave in this way. Most suffer silently. Some, however, definitely do. I learned this lesson the hard way. Fortunately, the experience was brief. It ended nevertheless with my behaving in a turning-down way that at the time I could barely really believe was in my behavior repertoire. I was responding to the situation as a damaged parent and a protector of my children, not from my therapist perspective. Using the intonation my mother used to describe as talking in no uncertain terms, I sternly told little Jennifer Feather, "I will never enable you to cross the doorstep of my house again. You are never welcome to enter my home." Those words were severe, specifically for talking to a 6-year-old girl. Were they words of abandonment? Yes. Or worse, I didn't merely leave Jennifer Feather. I told her that I would never allow her in my home again. I ejected her from my life. That is by no means conduct that I would usually do. My office staff describe me as imperturbable. Many people usually like me, and I typically like them. How could I have ever spoken so meanly to poor young Jennifer Feather? The activating event. It began when I invited 6 cute little girls to join my soon-to-be 7-year-old daughter and our family for a birthday weekend in the mountains. We live in Colorado. My daughter and our family were relishing an enjoyable weekend with the children at a cabin in the woods. For 2.5 days, the girls had fun with each other wonderfully. All of the girls, that is, other than Jennifer Feather. Every time a group of girls included Jennifer Feather in their activity, fighting appeared. Whether they had fun with dolls, built forts out of branches, baked cookies in the cooking area, or played hide-and-go-look for among the trees, each cluster of 2 or 3 girls that included Jennifer Feather wound up with tears, anger, screaming, and at times even hitting. The repeated eruptions of psychological upset turned me into a fireman. By the end of the weekend, I was tired. The last fight, an argument Jennifer Feather started with numerous of the other girls about who would ride home in which automobile, finally turned my switch. I transformed from warm, practical host to a sternly rejecting, fed up, absolutely overwhelmed, protective of the other kids, mad mom bear. "I don't want you ever again to set foot in my home," I gushed out. "You are never, that is never, to come play with my daughter again." I repeated the words forcefully to be certain that Jennifer Feather understood. Despite the fact that she lived just a block or so down across the street from us, from this moment forward, I would never ever again want her to appear in my world. I had a lot of success with ejecting Jennifer Feather. I pretty much succeeded. I never ever saw Jennifer Feather again. Jennifer Feather did, though, continue in the exact same grade as my daughter, who for several years felt scared at the sight of her rude, quick-to-pick-a-fight friend. As it turned out, Jennifer Feather also ended up attending my daughter's exact same college. Thankfully, my daughter by then understood that Jennifer Feather was herself the victim of her habit of selecting fights. By that time, she and I understood that Jennifer Feather suffered sadly and badly. Jennifer Feather herself was the primary victim of her extremely extreme psychological response patterns. Actually, my daughter's youthful experiences with Jennifer Feather might have served to help her as an adult to understand borderline patterns of functioning. Now a medical psychologist herself, my daughter has become especially reliable with clients who show borderline traits like Jennifer Feather's, patterns of emotional hyperreactivity, seeing circumstances and people as all good or all bad, having a divisive effect on groups, misinterpreting situations in ways that lead to feeling like a victim, and constantly putting themselves in circumstances that prove upsetting to themselves. This occurrence with Jennifer Feather, though it happened now over 30 years ago, continues to fascinate me. Particularly, how do some young people, male and female, develop character patterns that create chaos and fighting anywhere they go? 4 theories presently common in the psychological literature come to mind for me when I work with clients who show borderline patterns. One possibility is that the issue began with the parenting they got, parenting which had collapsed hierarchy. Collapsed hierarchy refers to parenting in a way that communicates to the child that the child has more power than the adults in the family. A second hypothesis is that their tendency to wreak havoc comes from biological sources. A third explanation could be that adult people with borderline personality disorder start to be specifically emotionally sensitive in response to an experience of trauma in their youthful years. A fourth clarification may lie in the paucity of mature habits for handling emotions and for collaborative resolution of conflicts. Let's look first at parenting problems. I do actually think that Jennifer Feather's mother may have been part of the problem. On the verge of a second divorce, she most likely was feeling highly stressed at the time. I have a hunch, too, that the mother designed anger as a method of requiring her spouse and kids to do what she wanted. In addition, Mom could have been too overwhelmed with her own problems to be able to take charge of Jennifer Feather. I had a hunch that Jennifer Feather used her anger to control everybody in the home, including her parents or caretakers, in a classic case of collapsed hierarchy. No grown-ups stopped Jennifer Feather's quarrelsome routines, so she continued to use them. I have a feeling that Jennifer Feather's father played a role also. The more he treated his daughter as his unique, can-do-no-wrong little girl, the more he weakened his partner's ability to tame her temper tantrums. Girls with a tendency to excessive anger need a strong parental system. Divide and dominate can be the daughter's highly efficient strategy for taking charge, and that's to everyone's hindrance, hers included. The second theory, positing natural predispositions, is especially capably set forth by Barbara Oakley in her book, Evil Genes. That is her title, not mine, as it can sound quite harsh. The book nevertheless makes intriguing observations. Written to come to terms with the life of her deceased borderline sister, the book seeks to understand the natural elements that can underlie this syndrome. Could natural factors explain a personality defined by quickness to take personal affront in circumstances that others would not, speed to anger escalations by which she controls others, and a propensity to unscrupulously control situations for personal advantage? While the book does tend to lump borderlines, sociopaths, psychopaths, and narcissists in a fairly undifferentiated diagnostic heap, there is reason for this muddying of the diagnostic picture, given how much overlap these syndromes seem to have with one another. I myself am supportive to Oakley's natural theory, having had in my practice 2 families in which one daughter and a set of twin girls appeared from infancy to be borderline. The aggressive twin would badger the sister, consistently triggering her to sob and suffer pain. This pattern continued or intensified as the twins aged. The parents or caretakers gradually gave up, creating a collapsed hierarchy with the challenging twin judgment everybody in the family. I have dealt with comparable patterns in other families, with brothers or sisters rather than twins, in which the parents could never come to terms with a challenging child who was ultimately labeled borderline. Generally, one element of the inefficacy of the parents was that the difficult daughter showered love on the dad and hid her aggressiveness toward others in the family from him. Consequently, the dad never accepted the mother's evaluation that the problematic kid was disrupted and excessively troubling to others. With a divided parental unit, the difficult kid went on to conquer and rule the roost. The third theory, presuming prior trauma, also merits reliability. While my work as a psychologist focuses mainly on grown-ups and couples, I usually work collectively with an energy therapist, my coworker, Dale Peterson. In one session, Dale dealt with an attractive 3rd-grade girl named Layla. Layla seemed to me quite borderline. She immediately brought to mind for me young Jennifer Feather. Like Jennifer Feather, Layla could be charmingly cute. At other times, according to her mother, Layla would end up being sullen, offensive, play the victim role, and then strike out, mainly verbally, at her siblings and her good friends. Layla's mama, who accompanied her to treatment sessions, seemed to be warmly empathetic and appropriately reliable as a caretaker. She did report that from infancy, Layla was a needier than normal child, needing to be held much more of the time than her brothers or sisters had needed when they were children, and engaging more parental attention than the other children in the family. Still, the girl's regular anger outbursts were wearing down the patience of her parents and siblings. Using techniques from the treatment method created by Bradley Nelson, described the body code, Dale helped Layla and her mom to recognize an event that had occurred in Layla's nursery school when she was just 3 years old. Another kid in her class had entered the class when Layla was in the room alone. That kid, referred to as a bully, had horrified Layla. The minute they identified this occurrence, Layla's face clouded over. Unexpectedly, a cloudburst of tears appeared. As Layla later described it, I began to throw up out tears. When the sobbing episode had passed, and the tears had dried, Layla described feeling a substantial sense of relief. From that point forward, the frequency of her combating with the other kids radically diminished. A lot more importantly, her self-esteem started to flourish, and she became a greatly happier and emotionally robust kid. Energy treatment methods, such as Bradley Nelson's emotion code, I do believe are especially necessary in treatment with borderline personality patterns. They seem to be able to reduce the effects of mental reversal, the propensity to be self-sabotaging. They can neutralize also the deeply held subconscious belief of, if it exists, that I am not lovable. Without reversing these two phenomena, treatment is unlikely to make enormous or lasting progress. The fourth hypothesis is that people who operate in the manner of a person with borderline personality disorder need to update their emotional self-regulation and conflict resolution abilities. The ones with borderline disorders explode in anger rather than calmly participating in problem-solving. Dealing with them is a lot like living in a field of landmines. Whatever the childhood experiences, to be effective in adulthood, these kids do need to learn skills for dealing with anger. They really need to learn to leave the circumstance rather than by taking off in a way that risks damaging others and themselves as well. Borderline functioning tends to involve a pattern of experiencing problems through the lens of victimhood. Once they feel hurt, up pops the mantra, I am a victim, so I have a right to victimize you. Lacking reliable relationship repair work tools, people with borderline practices make matters worse after upsets by aiming to get even instead of healing the wounds. Madly getting back at is just an incorrect idea of how to enjoy pleasing relationships. Similarly, when they want something and fear they might not get it, the ones with borderline personality patterns normally lack how-tos for creating win-win options, an ability that is vital for sustaining harmonious relationships. The hyperreactive feelings of a person with a borderline disorder posture extra obstacles. Collective problem-solving dialogue normally works out if both participants are operating from a calm zone. Whenever people feel mad, for this reason, they have to have the ability to stop briefly and even exit the problem circumstance to give themselves time to return to a calm emotion. At that point, however, abilities at win-win problem-solving can produce a happy ending. The ethical of the story? Primarily, fair or not, borderline behaviors can trigger people who want to get away from them. Second, with regard to the reason for the propensity to develop emotional turbulence, I believe that all four theories of how and why borderline personality disorders develop merit consideration. In any case, 1, 2, 3, or all of the aspects might end up being pertinent. Finally, these understandings can make it possible for people with borderline character syndromes to enjoy more gratifying lives and smoother relationships, if they want to. Way too much success at getting their way via anger, however, alas, can make it hard for the ones with borderline patterns to accept that what seems to work for them in gaining domination makes them losers in sustaining positive relationships. Chapter 2. Is borderline personality a female's illness? A cop pulls over a weaving, speeding automobile. The chauffeur, weeping uncontrollably, states a horrible split with a future husband, leading to overindulgence in alcohol and exclaiming desires to commit suicide. If the driver is a woman, the officer may wish to provide her a medical facility where she will be hospitalized with diagnoses of depression and maybe borderline personality disorder. If it is a guy, the police officer might be more likely to deliver him to prison, where he will be labeled an intoxicated. In treatment settings, borderline personality disorder is detected far more typically in women than in men, some research suggesting a ratio of 3 to 1 or more. But in general population studies, prevalence rates are similar. Several aspects may account for the variation. First off, women look for help more frequently than men. In women, spontaneous, destructive habits might more regularly be credited to illness, which can be dealt with. In men, comparable conduct could be seen as antisocial, where only reaction is police. Just as borderline personality disorder might be underdiagnosed in men, so also the male prevalence of the antisocial personality disorder diagnosis could reflect an underdiagnosis in women. A soon-to-be-published research study takes a look at these differences. Men with BPD diagnosis displayed more externalizing conduct, like interpersonal aggression, more violent self-harming patterns, and more antisocial traits, and that includes much heavier drug abuse. Women displayed more internalizing features. Those might include more overt psychological expressions, such as sobbing or sticking dependency. Since long-term diagnosis for BPD is better than for ASPD, it is important to recognize the distinction, to direct treatment efforts where they are most needed and helpful. Chapter 3: Black-White Interpersonal Relationships and Borderline Conduct. Borderline personality disorder, or BPD, has become something of the taste of the week over the last few years. It's a useful label when properly applied, but has become so ubiquitous as to have lost some of its gravitas. In really understanding this disorder, it is essential to appreciate one of its most significant social attributes, the propensity for the borderline to split others, defining them as black or white, that is, entirely good or entirely bad, without room for a gray area. BPD is a psychological disorder that carries with it a hidden system of clinical depression and/or medical anxiety. It is itself not organic in origin. At times, it co-occurs with bipolar disorder and is also normally related to both addictive and compulsive conduct. The most dominant marker for BPD is psychological dysregulation, which is a failure to grasp or react to states of emotionality and/or react to the experience of those states of emotionality in others, in a manner that would be considered to fall within the bounds of conventional social propriety. Emotional dysregulation, then, is a failure on the part of an individual to recognize what would be considered the boundaries of typical reaction to what is sometimes an even decently mentally charged social interaction. There are, in service of this, two prominent styles of borderline development that occur on the entire continuum of borderline conduct: the aggressive and the demure borderline styles. The aggressive borderline character responds to tension, anxiety, and perceived rejection with rage, object-directed, self-directed, and other directed physical violence, as well as passive, although sometimes active, suicidality and homicidality. The demure borderline character retreats from a situation where they perceive themselves to be victimized or potentially victimized, and engages in a sort of social disassociation, a type of morbidly passive-aggressive reaction to social stress factors that feels and looks like a complete psychological shutdown and withdrawal. This is notified in part by an extreme essential on the part of the individual to avoid being accountable for any kind of surrounding situations, even when those circumstances and scenarios are self-created. All of us can be a bit borderliney sometimes, falling victim to a moment of psychological dysregulation, getting a little stalkerish, paranoid or hypervigilant, sowing the seeds of discontent or spreading out malicious chatter, pulling away into a state of passive avoidance or severe non-confrontation, etc. That is something of the incentive for what's a profound personality disorder, managing to lose some of its gravitas in common use. We can all get a little crazy at times. It's when these qualities are at the core of an individual's social style or position, a level of social disturbance so severe as to in fact be characterized as a character disorder, that things become more intriguing. We are first drawn into a borderline relationship by the charm and glamour of severe idealization about who we are and whom or what it is we represent that is shown to us. We are split white. This scenario feeds our ego and makes us feel safe, really wanted and loved. Guys are especially susceptible to the perils of this social idealization because of the sexual charge that these sorts of relationships tends to be intense, leaning decidedly more towards the kinky than to the sweet and romantic. Almost instantly, though, the inability of the borderline character to develop a genuine psychological connection triggers this idealized perception to tarnish as they feel they aren't getting their needs met, that they're unfinished, or they're dissatisfied, and so on. Depending upon the rapidity of the cycle, within weeks, months, or at times years, this idealized image is changed bit by bit with, for lack of a more medical term, its evil twin. The other is divided black, and once one is taken there, the perception on the part of the borderline character, while it may flip-flop for a time, is not likely to be reversed. One of the main psychosocial symptoms of the borderline style is the tendency to objectify others. Follow this. Psychological dysregulation, by definition, requires a failure in the inability to comprehend and/or process emotionality, a failure in the ability to understand and/or process feelings suggests a failure in the capability to develop emotional connection. An absence of emotional connection leads to treating others as things, not people. The borderline personality hence resides in a world populated by things instead of others, objects of love, objects of hate, items of mirth, items of rage, always items, always extremes, and never ever really linked, whether violent or demure in style. No matter the style of borderline behavior, nor the degree of emotional dysregulation presented, ultimately and undoubtedly, people and things within the borderline system become transformed from their original idealized white state into what may be described as the negativized black state. That is, they become the focal point of a negativeness so severe, a negativity is driven by a sense of disappointment, betrayal, abandonment, loss, and so on, whether real or more likely perceived, that the person or thing becomes characterized as wholly bad, at times even wicked, and deserving of some penalty or retribution. The effects of this split characterization on the part of the borderline personality can cause behavior that varies anywhere from basic stalking to social retaliation to murder. I had a friend in New York whose former mistress would stand in the doorway across the street from his business for hours, just smoking cigarettes. A colleague of mine once spent the night in a psych ward handcuffed to a bed because he would not address his previous sweetheart's phone call. A nurse, she had called 911 and convinced the dispatcher that he was suicidal. Another good friend of mine was totally ostracized by the members of his country club because his former fiancée fabricated ongoing tales of social and sexual deviance about him that she fed into the rumor mill. One of my clients once held a knife to his marriage partner's throat because he didn't have the t-shirt he wanted for an organization trip back from the dry cleaners. This list is unlimited. The true treachery here is that this sinister process of ideal to evil reversal gradually and inexorably assails the ego integrity of the person being divided, and that the person, while intellectually understanding that the other is acting out in an inappropriate and in some cases dangerous manner, begins to doubt their own peace of mind. This is because the person being split starts to mirror the qualities and habits of the borderline character she or he is experiencing in reaction to, and sometimes in an effort to manage, the behavior with which she or he is confronted, something that I refer to as counter-borderline character. A grasp of the numerous elements of this disorder can be valuable for us in handling and preserving our relationships, and also our less intimate interpersonal interactions with a person exhibiting borderline characteristics. This is by virtue of our awareness of the natural and degree of social and psychological deregulation that we could be challenging, and venturing to hold space for that, and understand what part of the relationship it is for which we are actually responsible. Chapter 4. The relationship between borderline and bipolar illness. Till specifying attributes were established almost 40 years ago in the DSM-3, borderline personality disorder, or BPD, was an unclear and uncertain concept. Because a primary characteristic is mood swings, some early scientists firmly insisted BPD was only a version of bipolar affective disorder, or BAD. After all, if there could be bipolar 1 and bipolar 2, why wasn't there a so-called borderline personality disorder, something along the line of bipolar 4, 5, or 6? Later studies developed that popular symptoms, such as abandonment fears and an unsteady sense of identity, clearly demarcated BPD from BAD. Genetic data also noted distinctions. A recent Norwegian study employed animal scanning to compare brain functioning in clients diagnosed with BPD, bipolar 2 disorder, and a control group. Scientists found similarities and distinctions in metabolism in these two groups. Both groups contrasted with controls, displayed reduced metabolic process in parts of the brain associated with emotional control and social interactions. BAD2 clients exhibited distinctly decreased metabolic process in the cerebellum, brainstem, and parts of the cortex associated in other studies with neurobiological depression. BPD clients revealed lower metabolism in other areas, including the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is intimately associated with the endocrine system, which includes stress responses and hormone secretions, including cortisol, testosterone, and estrogen. The hypothalamus is also key in the production of oxytocin, which relates to maternal emotions and warm social behavior. As we discover more about how the brain works, we should really appreciate that signs and diagnoses intermingle in different ways. Just as the symptom of a cough could ultimately cause isolation of specific bacteria, diagnosis, and treatment, so a psychiatric symptom may eventually lead us to separate a certain region of the brain that causes a treatment that can alleviate suffering. Chapter 5. How to diagnose borderline personality disorder. My concept is, that even among highly educated psychological health providers, borderline personality disorder is a medical diagnosis that inspires a fear or avoidance reaction. I can think of no other clear reason why these patients so many times have not the slightest idea of what troubles them, in spite of years of therapy, often with several suppliers, as this is sometimes part of the scientific picture. Depressed patients know what their analysis is. Anxious clients know what their analysis is. Clients with psychotic disorders are normally notified about their condition. Substance reliance issues are discussed honestly, and relapses are typically charted. But borderline patients are often left in the dark. As a theme, individuals with borderline personality disorder have particular troubles with attachments to others, usually due to weak points in their early lives. People with BPD have severe trouble managing their own feelings, keeping healthy close relationships, and holding on to a strong sense of their own identities. This isn't the fault of these patients. Many borderline people I see are experiencing really limited insight into their condition. Most don't present like Angelina Jolie in the motion picture Girl Interrupted, inappropriate, manipulative people to be stayed away from at all expenses. Sometimes they're combat-trained men with huge muscles who are suffering. I figure that if we as providers are to have an actual chance to form a better attachment to these patients, it is critical to start by speaking truth in a considerate way. I have been fine-tuning my method to this conversation for some years, and I'm sure it's not perfect, but it has never led to any patient blasting me or instantly dropping out of treatment. No, quite the contrary. The response has been relief and the starter days of trust. Here's how I've been making this technique. First and foremost, I have on hand a non-judgmental explanation of the symptoms of BPD. Then, I ask the patient if he or she has ever heard of BPD. It is very important to learn what the patient knows and whether he or she comes in with potential unwarranted negative impressions of what BPD is. Then, I clarify that based upon their early attachment history, it might be likely that they are fighting with something that's correctable when we have the right analysis. Next, I discuss how Marcia Linehan, a high-functioning and very successful psychologist, developed an effective, well-researched treatment called dialectical behavior modification, or DBT, for borderline character as someone who struggled with issues that could be similar to theirs. Here, I'm going to describe readily available treatments for BPD. For example, at the VA, 3 of my associates launched an exceptional DPD group for veterans with BPD. I then clarify that DBT group program focuses on abilities connected to emotional control, distress tolerance, mindfulness, and social efficiency. Then I ask the patient if he or she can see why I may think this treatment could be on point based upon themes in the story of their lifetime and what the DBT group targets. Here, it is practical to choose a line or two from their story, like, "When you told me that you get so overwhelmed when you feel abandoned that you burn your arms with cigarettes." In each case I've seen, the patient will say yes, because they will see that you are listening well, and they will see how a treatment program with these attention areas could be practical. Next, I tell them that I'm not sure if they would actually have the diagnosis or not, and wants to assess the criteria together with them to see if they think this fits. Then we go through a checklist of signs and talk together about each one. It is essential to make this evaluation without fear and to use a respectful tone. So you do not say, "Do you have a pattern of putting therapists on a pedestal, and after that, basically shooting them the first time they dissatisfy you?" Instead, you might say, Do you tend to see others in your life in severe ways, either seeing people as awful or mean, perhaps even with other therapists you have seen in the past? And in listening to patients, here's where therapists need to have clinical discernment. Some signs of BPD resemble what anyone at times would reveal through extremely increased times of tension. So, medical professionals need to assess whether there's a medically substantial pattern for each possible sign. As an analogy, when detecting manic signs for bipolar disorder, for a patient to say, "I went on a shopping spree and spent $500 on a cell phone," isn't the same thing as saying, "I have purchased vehicles I could not pay for several times in the past." At the time of this process, I provide helpful psychoeducation with the patient. If you do this respectfully, then at the end of this conversation, there will probably be no resistance at all to the diagnosis and referral. A patient will see what you are seeing and will essentially be confirming for you what ails him or her. For some patients, when I notice that they really need more time to process or really need to be much more empowered, I will say, "So, we have a sense of what this might specify, what you are fighting with. Why don't you take this printed information on BPD, provide them with a truth sheet that has a clear and respectful tone. Give it a few days of thought, and then take out 2 highlighter pens of 2 different colors. Highlight every little thing you think fits in one color, and in the other color, emphasize every one that is not a pretty good fit for your experience. We will discuss this later." Using a method like this starts a medical relationship that's based on truth-telling, and that is a kind of respect. To recap then, though I am by no means an expert in DBT, as a generalist with a free-range method to practice, I have realized that the best way to identify borderline character is to be brave, be kind, and be respectful. Chapter 6. Can you treat borderline personality with unconditional love? Question. Can you cure borderline personality disorder with unconditional love? Answer. No, I'm afraid not. I'm extremely sorry to say this, but it can't. Having said that, unconditional love is incredibly essential to their healing, as long as you aren't strengthening undesirable behavior like abuse. I'm serious. Knowing this and truly accepting it in your body are 2 different things, so I'll say it again. Your love, no matter how deep, unconditional, and unselfish, can't cure this disorder any more than it can cure cancer, a heart problem, schizophrenia, and eating disorders. I am sorry. I know you're convinced you will be the exception. Regrettably, everybody thinks they're an exception. It's a mathematical impossibility. The people who recovered, or are recovering, do so because they work very hard and normally have great support systems with reliable treatment and aftercare support. Sometime later in this book, I'll explain the role that genuine love does play. It's a huge one. Let me more explain why genuine love isn't a treatment. The brain's role in BPD. First off, BPD is a brain disorder, like bipolar or schizophrenia. You cannot fix the brain. The first neuroscience to do so will make $1 jillion. Extremely quickly, the parts of the brain that control emotions, make them stable, and prevent the person from taking spontaneous actions out of whack in folks with this disorder. Researchers have better language than out of whack, but it will provide for these purposes. The parts of the brain that control emotions are overactive and flood the brain like a tsunami. If you look at borderline brain under tension with an MRI, you can see this happening in flower of color. The brain is broken partially simply because of problems with the neurotransmitters, the chemical messengers. It involves the physical structures that you would see if you were doing an autopsy, the amygdala, if you want to be specific. Psychiatrists try to repair brain chemicals with different kinds of medications, but we're at the beginning stages, and we can only deal with BPD traits, not BPD as a whole. It is uncertainty that includes attempting different medications in different strengths. Every person with BPD responds differently, and there are a ton of bad effects. There is no surgery to fix the physical brain, except perhaps in a science fiction movie. The environment. Love by itself, without work from the person, can't get rid of the early environment that the person was raised in. If their caregivers were not really good ones, that suggests by the time that the necessary attachment bonds were formed, around 2 years old, your loved one was in the wrong line for parents. Developing good attachment bonds is critical to forming healthy relationships. It's still possible with some work and treatment. None of us had flawless parents or caretakers, but if they were violent, your family member has additional work to do. If they will not do that, it is a problem. The love you give now can't alternate to the love they were supposed to have gotten back then. The lifestyle of Marilyn Monroe is a good example. Born to a mentally unsteady mom and missing dad, she spent her childhood in a series of foster houses and an orphanage. For a while, she lived with her ill mother, who had a series of psychological crises. She had better homes, but 2 times men tried to sexually assault her. Circulated from one place to another, she actually never had a chance. As an adult, she was well known for her emotional vulnerability. No matter how many men loved her for real, no matter how cherished she was to the public, absolutely nothing could fill the empty hole inside her. She could be the most popular star with very likely borderline personality disorder, aside from Princess Diana, although neither were formally identified. The undetectable, transparent plastic spacesuit. The transparent plastic spacesuit is the third reason love can't cure BPD, or more precisely, get rid of certain BPD traits. Think of the spacesuit as a semi-permeable and flexible person-shaped, clear 3-inch piece of plastic that surrounds your loved one at all times, but can't be seen. It also can't be felt. You can try to break it, burn through it, or use a buzzsaw, a brick, a spear, a drill, or dynamite. But the suit is really difficult, developed over a lifetime of things like low self-esteem, rejection, sensitivity, embarrassment, the fear of desertion, the fear of intimacy, the fear of being understood, the fear of engulfment, and an inability to believe they are worthy of love. The big thing to remember about the spacesuit is that it was there before you ever walked into the scene. You did not trigger it. You can't control it. You cannot cure it. The suit belongs to the disease, the way that red dots belong to the measles, or deadly cells are part of cancer. You can't deal with the cells, spots, or spacesuit without dealing with the underlying disorder. And you aren't the therapist. A short exercise. There's only one way it can be opened, from the inside. For this reason, it is pretty much up to the borderline individual. Try this exercise to see how scary it is. Make a list of all your inchoate fears, defenses, and secret things you don't want people to know about you. Think of tearing them all down and being exposed. How would you want somebody to deal with approaching you about them? The issue isn't that you do not give enough love. The problem is that it can't permeate the spacesuit. your messages of love can have a hard time getting through to them. It's not your fault. Your loved one may implicate you of not saying, "I love you" enough, or saying it with the wrong inflection or at the wrong time. They might claim that you say it, but don't show it, because you didn't give up your family for them, or you work too many hours, put your friends in front of them, have hobbies that take some time without them, do not want to have sex when they do, want to do things without them, want privacy, don't want to represent each minute, or have a life of your own. And by the way, you are worthy of all of those things, and you don't need their approval to have them. Borderline reasoning. These are all excuses. The real issue is that your member of the family does not feel the love, and they don't know why. And that's not their fault. The suit is invisible to them also. So if it is not them, they figure, it makes sense that the issue must be you. It's an error that hurts. You can ask your family member with BPD what you could do to help them feel loved, and do it if it is a sensible request. However, if others in your life aren't grumbling, you're acting loving, so stop feeling guilty. 2 tin cans with a string. You presume, however, that your message is linking. You do so much for them. In fact, you may do way too much for them. But remember, Wi-Fi desert. You get frustrated because they keep checking you to prove it to them, and not always in a good way. If you have a partner with BPD, they test just because the start of the relationship is over, and now that you're not fawning over them each second, they're really afraid of losing you. They could be biting just to see how long you stay. In the meantime, you're not passing the test. You do not even appear to care. You are not quitting your life to write love poems, look in their eyes, and play love tunes the way you did during those heady, extreme first few weeks. Individuals with narcissist personality disorder have trouble reaching a much deeper level of intimacy after the initial high of a new relationship. People with BPD may need so much of a guarantee and presentations of love that this much deeper level provokes anxiety. It is natural that candlelit dinners give way to eliminate about who is doing the dishes. It must be a scary time for individuals with BPD. The self-fulfilling prediction. When a person has low self-regard, everything looks like criticism. You don't say it, but they hear it. You say you are not thinking that. They don't actually believe you. Constantly remember that with BPD, emotions, accomplishment over facts each time. They do not always let themselves feel the love. And it doesn't matter how you try to prove it to them. Some people are pessimists. You may have become aware of an individual in a job examination who heard nothing but rave evaluations and one tiny criticism, and all they remember is that one small review. Well, the person with BPD in the assessment heard, "You're about to get fired," and they remain in crisis mode. You could suggest a completely different restaurant than they want to go to, and they will hear, "I do not value your viewpoint at all about anything." You will quickly discover that you cannot prove an unfavorable thing. You can't prove that at this moment there is not a 6-foot-tall purple bunny with a machete following you just beyond your sight, just because even with a dozen policemen following you, the bunny can hide itself. So you can't prove that you really love someone if they do not think they are worthy of love. What love can do. Genuine love cannot treat your relative, but if a borderline individual is working towards recovery, it is a 10 out of 10 in value. Since they really believe they are worthless and bad, total acceptance helps them learn they're adorable. Whenever I meet a recovered borderline person, I always ask them What was the essential to their healing? Just one thing they all reference is genuine support. Most found it from a unique belief in God. Religions aside, secularly speaking, this makes a lot of sense. All loving, all forgiving, all giving. There at all hours of the day or night, and with just a few needs of his own, God creates an excellent support. In terms of unconditional support, therapists follow. Therapists do not have needs of their own. Their purpose is just to be there for their clients and assist in their recovery. Psychoanalysts who concentrate on reparenting are specifically fit for this. Numerically, next comes members of the family, especially partners. Partners have their own needs, and that's okay. You aren't going to be flawless. You aren't God. You aren't a therapist, and you shouldn't be. Your role is a member of the family, not a psychiatrist. It's okay. It's essential that you express your needs, take some time for yourself, say no, set limits, have your own support system, stay safe, put the children first, be happy, and live a typical life as much as you can. If you give up yourself, you're going to come to resent your partner. You won't have anything left to give. But this only works as long as you aren't tolerating or accepting abuse. That's not recovery. That is enabling and going backwards. This has been Borderline Disorder, Relationships, Drama, and Warnings by John Kirschchen, narrated by Sarah Owens.